Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ISACA members. With temperatures having dropped quite significantly the last days, I wish you a very warm welcome to our monthly Innovation and Tech Talk online event. It's the last event of this year for 2022 and will be a really interesting topic on a different internal audit methodology for different results. So my name is Matthias Kraft. I'm a member of ISACA Germany and I'm a member of the Innovation and Tech Talk expert group. And I'm very thrilled today to be joined by Maxime Briere from the Allied Command Operations, also NATO. And you, Max, later on you will give kind of the definition of how the different organizations work together. So before I hand over to Max, just some general introduction notes. So this event will be recorded and made available together with any handouts after the event on our website isaca.de. A CPE certificate will be sent approximately 2 weeks after the event to the email address participants provided when registering. Questions to the presenter or moderator can be asked via the chat function in the WebEx suite. Please send any feedback on the event, suggestions or requests you might have to our group mailbox, fg-innovation@isaca.de. And just already in terms of the outlook, so the next Tech Talk will take place on 26th of January next year, so it's 2023, on the topic of the Hinweisgeberschutzgesetz. So it's a slight different topic from today. And also just advertising our podcasts, which are available at isaca.de/podcasts. And our group just posted another one for December on the topic of cybersecurity. So with having this said, Max, I will hand over to you. And also just wanted to say that Max and myself, we work together at Ernst & Young. It looks like it's probably like 1 or 2 decades back. And I still remember very well when we delivered our first engagement together. It was data analytics for a financial service customer. And I think we really had good fun. You came just over from Canada with your French-Canadian accent, and I was more with my German-French accent. And I think we had really good fun when we delivered this engagement. So with having said the introductory note, hand it over to you.
You had fun. It was torture for me. I was kidding. Okay, I'll try to share my slides. Good morning, everybody. My name is, sorry, it starts off well. My name is Maxime Briere, Canadian. I work as a principal auditor for Allied Command Operations. I'll explain to you what that is later, but it's a strategic command of NATO. So when I was asked to come present by Matthias, I quickly looked at the presentations which were available, the past presentations for the TED Talks. And I quickly noticed that it was commercial, that it was very interesting tools and services available to cyber practitioners and auditors. I assure you, I'm not commercial. I'm just a guy, I'm just an auditor. However, if you bear with me, I think I have some interesting slides to help you understand better what is NATO and give you a little bit of our perspective on how we audit in NATO and how it might be different and how you could potentially learn from these and reflect on your own approach towards this. So before we get started, just about me very quickly, because I think it's always interesting for newcomers, for new individuals starting their career path to understand what other individuals have been through throughout their life to reach where they are. So in terms of career path, I started at Ernst & Young in Montreal. That's where my ISACA journey started with the CISA, which was very helpful for me to understanding the world, the business world, and how to apply IT general controls. I then moved to Ernst & Young Luxembourg because I was looking for international experience. And as you know, or might not know, Luxembourg is quite thirsty for expats. So when you apply to go work in Luxembourg as an expat, it takes about 10 minutes and you have your work permit in the mail. So I went to work there in Luxembourg. That's where I did the C-Risk, which was very useful for more advisory pieces. So I continued my ISACA journey through the C-Risk While at Ernst & Young Luxembourg, very quickly, it was during the financial crisis. A lot of people left, were fired, or left or moved to New Zealand. So I ended up head of IT risk and assurance over there and realized that being a partner was not my ambition. So I started looking on the market and found at RTL Group a very interesting post in IT governance and control. So I went to work at RTL Group for a little while. That's where I did the CJIT. Very, very useful because I ended up implementing central IT governance. So implementing committees, central policies, central tools. And this was all supported by the CJIT. So again, ISACA helped me a lot in my progress, in my journey throughout my career. While at FTL, I've always had an ambition, interest in international organizations. So I kept looking at the UN, kept looking at NATO, and eventually an interesting post came up at NATO and applied, and I was lucky enough to get it. And that brings us to today, where I work for Allied Command Operations. And that's where I did my CDPSE now. I grandfathered. Luckily, I didn't need to redo it because of the work I've been doing on data protection. So I'm even now continuing my ISACA journey. So I have a lot to be thankful for ISACA, and still now use it quite a bit, even though I've now also done my CIA and done my certified fraud examiner as well. I find the ISACA certification really bring value to the work we do and expand way beyond what is IT audit and cyber, and applies on every single process I'm currently covering. So this was a little bit of introduction about me, my ISACA journey. I think interesting now for you is to understand NATO. Everybody I speak to outside of NATO doesn't understand NATO. It's a very complex organization. You see in the news, you hear about it, but nobody really knows what they do and why it's such an important organization. So I'll try to give you a little bit of an overview today. It's important to know I don't speak on behalf of NATO. Everything I will be presenting will be NATO unclassified, releasable to public. And as you'll see in the top right corner, to protect myself as well, you'll see that every information I will be provided is available on the public network and will remain a releasable to public presentation. So very quickly, information you probably know already from NATO. So this is the basics. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So it's cross-Atlantic with mostly European countries, including Turkey, Canada, and United States. The fundamental role, guarantee the freedom, security of its members' countries, by political military means. I'll come back to that very shortly. Jens Stoltenberg is the current Secretary General. So he's been there since, I believe, 2014. He was supposed to change in 2022. However, something happened that made him extend beyond his current mandate to still be with us, which we're very happy. He's very a strong speaker and represents the alliance very well. And it's the top political decision-making body within the NATO. It's the North Atlantic Council. I'll come back to that later. The NAC is a very important aspect to NAC. So when we think about NATO, for us, it's important to understand it's a political and military alliance. But I'll show you the structure after. Some people don't realize, but a big part of it is politicians sitting together and taking decisions. It's not just military commanders preparing for or exercising their capabilities. It's really a political-led alliance. It's a transatlantic link, so it's unique in its way that it joins up very coordinated nations and ensures the security of cross-Atlantic Canada, United States, and Europe and Turkey. The collective defense aspect is very important. An attack on one is an attack on all. And that also allows smaller nations not have to rely only on their defense capabilities, but they can also rely on the others. So it's a sharing of burden, and it's a sharing of resources, and it's an agreement on moving forward together in terms of security and decisions. And the partnerships are very important. So NATO is not standing alone in its corner. It's got very strong relationships with the UN, with the EU, with the OSCE. So these are very important aspects of the partnership aspect. NATO is not sitting on its own taking decision. It's the nations with together other key parties such as this. So when we cover NATO, when we talk about NATO, there's going to be 3 layers that I'm going to present. There's going to be NATO HQ in Brussels, strategic commands, and the agencies. I'll go back to NATO HQ in Brussels. So when you look at NATO HQ in Brussels, it's a beautiful building, beautiful, beautiful building. And there's 4,000 people that work there. But of the 4,000 people that work there, it's important to understand 2,000 of those work there, but don't work for NATO. So they work at NATO, but don't work for NATO. They work for their own country. So they actually represent their country within committees. So they actually have NATO delegations. So Canada will have some people from the Canadian government in NATO, which are sitting on committees and taking decisions as ambassadors, as politicians, as representatives. We call this the permanent representation from the nations. So these are the NATO delegations. The same applies to military representatives. So the nations are sending military to act on behalf of the nation, not on behalf of NATO, to sit and provide advice and guidance in terms of military and help with the decision-making process, because it's a unanimous consensus approach. I'll explain next slide why this is so important. But when you look at the structure of NATO HQ, you have on top NATO delegations, which is basically the politicians, the military representative, which is military people from the nations coming. And these are meeting as part of committees, subordinate committees. There's 300 committees at NATO HQ. I'll provide some examples after. And all of this is supported by 2 types of staff. You have the international military staff, which is people that work for NATO at NATO HQ on the military side, on the military committee side, the IMS, International Military Staff, which is a mix of military and civilians. And on the NATO delegation side, it's 100% civilian, and they report to Secretary General, and these are the international staff. So basically, when you think about 4,000 people working in NATO HQ, you have 2,000, which is actually people that work at NATO, but not for NATO. They work for the nations, and they're part of the committees. And you have another 2,000 people, which is split between international military staff and international staff to support all the activities that go there, the finance, the IT, the HR, all the support functions to make sure all of these committees happen, including the secretary functions, the policymakers. The NOR, for example, is a very important body, which is the NATO Office of Resources. They will provide advice. It's all based with the civilian and military individuals, civilian side on the NOR. So this is for NATO HQ. So when you understand the structure, yes, it's military, but a very small portion, most of it, is politicians taking decisions, discussing, making sure everybody's in agreement on how to move forward and how to spend the funding that's being allocated to NATO. The next level, so you have NATO HQ in Brussels, which has its committees. The next level is the strategic command. So you have Allied Command Operations and Allied Command Transformation. So Allied Command Operations is where I work, and Allied Command Transformation is in Norfolk. There's a SAC-T, which is in Virginia, in the United States, which is forward-looking. So basically, they're looking at our future capabilities. What is NATO going to need in the future? While Allied Command Operations is now. What are we doing now? So all the missions, all the planning, all the policy is happening through Allied Command Operations. So this is very different structure to understand, because command operations is in Europe, the headquarters is in Mons in Belgium, and you have Allied Command Transformation, which is in the United States, looking at the future, so current operations, the current operations versus the transformation, the future looking. And all of these activities are supported by agencies. So basically, agencies are the internal suppliers. So I'll present the 2 major agencies after, but just to make everything happen, which on activities which are not core focus, you're going to try to use suppliers and procurement activities in order to be able to perform your activities. And the agencies have a huge role to play in making sure that NATO HQ and the Strategic Command can actually perform their activities. So when we talk about NATO HQ, if you've never been, if you passed in front of it, it's a gigantic building. It's a beautiful building. It's very new. It used to be across the street. They moved there. Like I said, there's 4,000 people that work there on different committees from between the representation. The main committee of the 300 committees, the main committee is the NAC. So the NAC is the most senior committee. Everything is decided through the NAC. They do delegate authority elsewhere, but every decision needs to be approved by the NAC. One of the main advisory body of the NAC is the military committee. So the military committee is composed of military representatives from the nations, and they provide, first of all, advice to the NAC, but also when the NAC takes the decisions, help translate the politician decision into what does that military capability mean. So translating from the politics to the military is one of the key roles of the military committee. Another key board, which is supporting the NAC, is the RPPB, the Resource Policy and Planning Board. So they're making sure that the resources that are being allocated to NATO from the nations are spent in line with the expectations. They have three main committees that are reporting to the RPPB to give them advice. So the first one is the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee is basically managing the military budget and the civil budget. So for the Strategic Command, the military budget is just to make our current activity work, basically. So the current, I think I have the values here. The current value for the, it was approved yesterday for 2023. The current value for the military budget and is now 1.96 billion, and for the civil budget, so for the NATO HQ international staff, 370 million. That's about 2.3 billion for the military budget. And this is under the remit of the Budget Committee to oversee that the spending is done accordingly. Additional to what it needs to perform our current activities, we have what is called the Investment Committee. And the Investment Committee is looking at NCIP funding. NCIP is Security Investment Program. It's future looking, it's the infrastructure. So the nations say, well, you have a budget, which is your military budget to do your activities. But in the future, if you need a new base, we're going to build it through an investment committee. So the investment committee then allocates fund for future looking. So a lot more linked to projects which are going through the transformation bit. And the current ceiling for, it's a ceiling, the current ceiling for the NCIP funding for 2023 is 1 billion. So looking forward to if we need to create a new HQ in a Scandinavian country, for example, or across the pond, or I'll speak about NATO 2030 a little bit later, but if there's investments there, it would go through the investment committee. So everything which is a new capability, a new infrastructure, is a different budget until it's ready. And then once it's ready, it's integrated into the budget committee, into the military budget, or the civil budget. The third of the main resource boards is the NATO Defense Workforce Committee, the NDWC. The NDWC ensures that we have the right people to do the right task. So they ensure that based on the request of the nations, here's what we need to do, A, B, C. Do we have enough people to do all of these activities? And it's through a nation-led committee that they decide if we need more people or less people. And all of the peacetime establishments, which we call the actual post, need to be approved by this committee before they are created. So this is a little bit the process. And the main committees related to the resources and the two main senior committees, the NAC and the military committee. And all of these committees, again, national representatives. So these are not NATO staff. Yes, the chairman might be a NATO staff and the secretary might be a NATO staff, but the people making the decisions are actually representative from the nations. And very importantly, on each of these boards, they need to, these committees, they need to reach a consensus. If there's one that says no, it's a no. And it's very complicated. You can expect that a lot of projects and programs are taking some time because there's always these political discussions happening. So it's very important, but it's a critical component to making the alliance work. Nobody goes against anybody. It's always everybody together. So the 30 nations are always approving the way forward together. As this is a very time-consuming, extensive process, very important to know, you don't need to say yes. You just don't need to say no. So if somebody says no, it's stopped. But if no one says no, you don't need to say yes, then you can move forward. They invented a process which is called under silence procedure. So basically there's a decision, it's sent out to the nations and said, unless you complain or say no, we're going to move forward with this. So a lot of decisions are taken through the silence procedure, which requires a lot of work from the nations because they need to keep track of all these documents coming in, making sure that they monitor in time to make sure they're not late on their decision-making process. So it's a very time-expensive, very difficult process for the nations, but a critical one to make the alliance move forward in a coordinated and consolidated way. That's why right now it's going well within the organization, even though there's conflict between some nations. In terms of NATO terms, the nations really are in a coordinated and consolidated manner. It's very going well because of this consensus decision making. Is it optimally efficient? Maybe it's creating some challenges in terms of efficiency, but in terms of effectiveness and coordination, it's very important. So this was for NATO HQ, where I presented the committees, presented a little bit the key ones related to resources and the consensus approach. Jumping the strategic commands and going directly to the agencies, there's two main agencies. As I know, we have a lot of IT and cyber individuals joining us today. It's important you understand the NCI agency. So when you see CIS, Communication and Information System, in the rest of the world, it means IT. But for NATO, IT doesn't exist. We call it CIS. So every time you see CIS, it means IT. So the NATO IT agency, the CIS agency, is the main supplier for everything which is networks, communication, software, and cybersecurity centers. So everything which is IT is going through the NCI agency. The main other agency is NSPA, the Support Procurement Agency. So they try to centralize the procurement activities, but also help with all the infrastructural capabilities. Give you an example. In Italy, we have the remote piloted aircrafts, the drones. You can see a picture there behind the news article. And these needed an airbase. So we are on an Italian airbase, but NATO needed a part of this airbase for the drones, and therefore there was a construction of a HQ and basically a landing strip for the drones. That was all led by NSPA in order to make that happen. So this is the type of deliverable that are done by NSPA. NSPA also has some software that it provides. It has SAP, for example. It has asset management software that it provides. So it's also a supplier of CIS, and it has its own IT as well. While the agency, if we look on the right, that's the NCIA agency. They provide the networks and the services. So one of the key deliverables they had recently is a partnership network. It allowed to ensure secure connection with all the partners. So I can ensure that we can communicate timely and uninterrupted with all of these partner nations, which is a huge challenge, obviously, considering the wide landscape, the geography we need to cover for this. So coming down to the strategic commands. Again, there's Allied Command Transformation, which is Norfolk, USA. And there's Allied Command Operations. Allied Command Transformation, future-looking capabilities. They also have three entities, which is the Lessons Learned Center. So basically, it's an entity which looks at problems in delivery and make sure we don't reproduce the same mistakes, or just to do it better. So it's a whole entity linked to learning lessons. There's the Warfare Center, the Training Center are both used for exercises, making sure that NATO are able to exercise their capabilities. But as for me, I'm under Allied Command Operations. So I work for what is called the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, which is SHAPE. SHAPE is in Mons, in Belgium, and that's the Strategic Command. The Strategic Command has several subordinate commands, which we need to include as part of our audit scope. So the main, you look in the gray ones, which are the Joint Force Commands in Brunswick and in Naples. So these are responsible for the missions. So when we had Afghanistan, it was under the remit of Joint Force Command Brunswick. We have a mission in Iraq right now. It's under Joint Force Command Naples. So they're responsible for managing these operations. And then we have three, what we call single service commands, the Air Command, Land Command, Maritime Command. So these are what we call tactical commands. They make sure that plans are coordinated well for the air, but they also have some operational requirements. I'll present a little bit their activities a little bit later. Very interesting is the NATO Communication and Information Systems Group. So NCISG is a deployable capability. So we have a headquarters which is responsible to ensure that NATO can build a communication network wherever it needs to. So if it goes to the middle of a field in Bulgaria, well, there's maybe not sufficient communication structure there. Well, through their capabilities, they're able to very quickly build a network, secured network to be used by the commander in order to establish a camp on board and whatnot. So this is all taken care of by the NATO Communication Information CS, the NCIAG group. And then we have what is called the Joint Logistics Support Group, which is also linked to, if you look on the purple side, the Joint Support Enabling Command, which is in Germany. It's in Ulm. It's a very interesting command, which is responsible to ensure the logistics between the NATO nations. So if we need to take some people from Spain and bring them to Estonia, you can't just take your military gear and just start driving. No, you need to make sure that you have the legal rights, the agreements between the countries, but you also need to make sure that the infrastructure is able to handle it. And that's very complicated based on the plans, making sure that your logistics are appropriate for all the potential needs of the alliance. So this represents a little bit the main commands, but you also have, like NCISG has 3 different battalions, including one in Germany. The battalions are basically the trucks, which are the Fireflies, which are ready to roll out. So they have different bases a little bit. And the Air Command has 2 main, what we call KAOCs, which is responsible for a little bit like control towers to make sure that they're able to keep an eye on the sky. So they have 2 different control towers and a deployable one as well, which is in Italy. So this is a little bit about Allied Command Operations, the structure. It's not simple. It's very complicated. It's under the remit of the audit. So what is not included here are the missions, which I'll show you after. When we do an audit program, obviously we need to consider a risk-based approach because it's impossible for the team we have to be going to all these entities. So we need to have a rolling approach to it and see what type of topic we're covering and where it's a higher risk, because there's just too many entities to cover for our entity. So I said the Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, is where I work. SHAPE in Mons in Belgium, it's the Strategic Command. So basically from there, they prepare, plan, conduct, and execute NATO military operations, missions, and tasks. So there's a lot of planning that goes into military. So reacting to a scenario, what will we do if X happens? And then you need to make sure that you have the capabilities to activate the plan. And how you do that is you exercise this. And this is all managed through the Strategic Command, big part of what they do, managing the current operations and preparing for potential scenarios. It's a very complex, very interesting place to work. It's quite a shock when you come in as a civilian, because this is the ACO, Allied Command Operations, is 90% military and 10% civilian. So you come in a military world. You're not in your private world anymore. It's very different in terms of relationship, in terms of reporting. And that does impact how we deliver our audits and how we need to conduct and plan for them. So important to understand the command structure. So the ISACA is the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. He's a 4-star American general, and he usually has a 1 to 2 year tour within SHAPE. And he's the commander of all the other commanders within Allied Command Operations. He's got a deputy ISACA, which is a British 4-star, which is a lot of his tasks are linked with NATO HQ, making sure that the politics and the communication is flowing well between Allied Command and NATO HQ. But on site, really, the person that we see managing the day-to-day and the activities is really the Chief of Staff, which is a 4-star German general, Admiral Rula. And these tours are typically 3 years, so they change every 3 years. The Chief of Staff is responsible for the management board, responsible for the staff. Every decision basically goes through the Chief of Staff. The commander is more, the SACR is more about the vision, about the ultimate approval, but more about where are we going. And we have also a 4-star, 3-star French general, which is the vice cause, which is also on the audit advisory panel, the chair of our audit advisory panel. So a lot of the audit relationship is happening with this French general. So in terms of mission, there's many missions. I've selected just a few here. NATO mission in Iraq was started a few years ago. We were asked to, NATO was asked to provide some support into the training mission. So we've sent people there to support with the training of the Iraqi forces, but also on the policy and a political level. So we have a mission over there right now. We also are still present in KFOR. KFOR in Kosovo is an enduring HQ over there to support peace and security. We have Operation Sea Guardian, which is mostly linked to the refugee crisis, which happened. So it's a lot about managing the Mediterranean risks and activities and making sure that the activities are well performed and secured in this area. We have what is called the NATO Ballistic Missile Defense. So this is out of AirCom, and it's just to monitor any risk related to ballistic missiles. We have also the NATO air policing. So NATO air policing is 24/7 access to fighter jets, which are monitored. The skies are monitored by NATO, and if necessary, in terms of policy, we have fighter jets available. Obviously, NATO does not have any jets. It's using the jets of the nations, because I'll explain this later, but NATO does not really have a lot of assets. It's using assets from the nations, but it doesn't own anything except the AWACS. So right next to the fighter jets are the AWACS. AWACS are the big planes coming out of Luxembourg with that we see often in Luxembourg, but they actually come out of Geilenkirchen in Germany, and they have the big satellites, and they're able to create a picture of the skies and the ground to ensure command and control is available. So they're basically intel and command main ships in the sky. Very impressive. And the Resolute Support in Afghanistan, which ended in August 2022. I've been auditing in Afghanistan, and I'm very happy not to have to go back now. So talking about auditing. So auditing across NATO, you would think it's one big organization, but actually multiple layers of organizations, I explained. NATO HQ has hosts our external auditors, which is an internal external audit, the board, the International Board of Auditors for NATO. But they do also have some internal audit functions, which is the OIARM, which stands for its Office of Internal Audit and Risk Management. And they're also now going to do some compliance work. So it's a multi-faceted office at NATO HQ. I think right now there's about 4 individuals working for OIARM at NATO HQ for this. For the Strategic Command, we each have our own individual internal audits. ACT has 3 individuals, including 1 military. And ACO Internal Audit, we have 8 individuals, including 3 military. We have a Polish, a British, and a French. And the 5 others are civilians. And the agencies also have their own internal audits. So when you think about internal audit across NATO, it's very dispersed in terms of location. So ACO Internal Audit is from Belgium, located in Mons. ACT Internal Audit is from Norfolk in Virginia. NCIA Internal Audit sitting between The Hague in Netherlands and NATO HQ. And SPA Internal Audit sitting in Luxembourg, and OIRM and IBAN are sitting in Brussels. So you see the different picture of individuals. While we do have head of internal audit a community, there's exchange of information between all of the parties. It's still very independent in types of work, and the reporting lines are very different. So IRM reports to a Secretary General Private Office. We report to SACR, ACT reports to SACT, and then in the agencies, they report directly to their general managers of the agencies. While you look at this picture, we are obviously supported by a good mix of second line defense. So if you're not familiar with the lines of defense, internal control lines of defense, there's 3 main lines of defense. The first one is management, performing their own controls. The second line of defense is management activities supporting the accomplishments. I'll say, for example, security teams, LEGAD is the second line of defense, but there's internal control officers or second line of defense. And the third line of defense is usually the audit function, which is the last line of defense. In terms of second line of defense in NATO, we have internal control officers at most areas. So they're responsible for continuous control monitoring, but also project-based internal control review. So they make sure that processes are performing and updated, and that the control measures are sufficient. They're more a management tool. So if financial controller feels that a process needs to be looked at, he'll work in coordination with the internal control office. It's not meant to provide assurance, but rather provide a project approach, not a project approach, a support approach to making sure the maturity of the processes have the right control environment. As you've seen the complexity of ACO in several entities, there's about 7,000 people that work for ACO and all the entities. Obviously, with a team of 8 and the quantity of processes that we could audit, we need to be smart in terms of planning. So we need to use the second line of defense as much as possible where their activities are being performed. I remember when I was at Ernst & Young, we were using the SAS 65, which was basically using the work of internal audit to support the external audit function. Well, in terms of NATO, we do a little bit similar. We don't use the actual form SAS 65, but we basically look at the work being done by the second line defense, and to some regards, the external auditors as well, and make sure that there's no duplicate and maximize the efficiencies. This is a little bit how we structure internal audit across the commands. So talking about IBAN, so IBAN, the external auditors, they are a team of 30 individuals. They do financial audits and performance audits, as well as NCIP audits. So their financial audits would look at the consolidated financial statement of Allied Command operations, for example. So it's really a financial focus base. So most of their auditors are actually doing financial statements audits. The difference between internal audits, which report to local commanders or general managers or the SecGen, IBAN reports directly to the NAC. So their report goes up, and their reports are public. You can actually Google IBAN NATO, and you can find where they publish their financial audit reports, performance audit reports, as well as the security investment program audit reports. So as I mentioned earlier, the transformation bit is future looking. So capabilities are outside Allied Command operations budget until IBAN has a look and says, oh yeah, it's ready. So basically they're a check mark to make sure that these capabilities are ready to be integrated within the current operations. That's one of the big roles of IBAN. The performance audit, we can expect that if ACO is big, NATO is bigger. And performance audits are performed NATO-wide for multiple topics. They've looked at topics such as fraud, for example, looked at health and safety. Obviously, they can't go into deep dive. It's a lot survey-based, but it's very telling. So you can compare the NATO entities between each other. And as an internal auditor, access to these IBAN reports are critical to make sure that the risks are being well covered within our organization, make sure the messaging that we give our command is not diverse, saying internal audit saying it's bad, but IBAN saying it's good. We try to understand what are the different reporting lines on the different audit functions. Again, going back to coordination between the 3 lines of defense, IBAN being considering, like us, a 3rd line of defense. It's part of our assessment in terms of engagement planning, but also involved in the reporting aspects. So this was a little bit an overview of NATO. Now you understand NATO HQ, politicians, military, but mostly committees, taking decisions, talking a lot, making sure that everybody's getting along and that everybody's on the same page on the direction to take. And then you have the military committee that's saying, okay, now thank you very much, politicians, for these decisions. Here's how we translate that into military action. And then it goes down to either ACO or ACT in terms of direction. ACO, something to do now. ACT, something to think about in the future. So this is a little bit how the mechanism works. And then in ACO, we have the strategic command, which is SHAPE, which is the main decision body policy making. And it has 2 JFCs right now, which are managing some operations. And we have some single service commands, which are responsible for some of these activities. For AirCom, for example, doing the air policing and the BMD, but also looking at plans, making sure that the Air Force vision, the military air aspect of plans have been well considered, well coordinated. So really the focused on the single service command view. So this is a little bit how NATO is working as a whole. In terms of auditing allied command operations, I come from the private world. I come from Ernst & Young, and then RTL, where I supported the implementation of a SOC report. So I was deeply involved into service organization control, audit control, and now being a principal auditor for allied command operations, there's a lot of things that I've learned, that I've seen, that I wish I knew before, that I could have applied in my work, or maybe just some lessons learned. And I hope it'll help you reflect as well on your own practices. Maybe you'll find some ways to do things differently, maybe not better. Please take some, leave some. Obviously, the worlds are completely different. Some might be relevant, some might not be. And the first one, completely different, the staff onboarding. It's very interesting when you finally get hired at NATO and they tell you, yes, we choose you, and then we'll talk to you in a year. And you're like, I don't understand. Well, once you've been selected for NATO, you need to do a security clearance process. So basically Canada, my nation, needs to tell NATO, yes, this guy is not a risk, you can hire him. He's not going to spill national security secrets. Because getting access to NATO means getting a NATO security clearance. So you can have access to information up to NATO secrets. So the vetting process is very long and very dependent on which country. Some are really fast, some are really long. I was lucky. It took me 3 months and my security clearance was ready. We just recently hired an IT auditor within our organization. He's Belgian. We've been waiting now for 7 months. We're hoping he'll be here before the summer break. So it's a really complex requirement process, not the requirement or recruitment process itself, but once you have recruited the right person, the person needs to consider there's a year of waiting. And the coordination of when to actually resign from the new post, it's creating some challenges in terms of recruitment, that's for sure. Once you do actually set foot into NATO as an auditor, one thing that's important is pre-deployment training. So you will be going, or well, some posts are asked to deploy to the missions, to go for auditors to go provide assurance that the missions are being run in line with the ISACA's vision. So to make sure that civilians don't just go to NATO missions unprepared, you get pre-deployment training. And that's a week where you are out of your element, I can tell you that. Having no military experience before, you're being kidnapped, you're being having to handle complex medical situations, you get to walk through fire. This is actually a picture of me. My wife hates it. She says, I think I'm Tom Cruise on this one. I love this picture, it's on my wall. But it's quite an activity to go through, and it's very, very useful to understand the world you're stepping into. And this is the so what of this. The staff onboarding is important as an auditor to understand the world where you are. And I think this pre-deployment training in going to these missions makes you understand who you're talking to and why are you there. And it plays a lot in the program, how you're going to set up your program, but also how you're going to report priorities. Your priorities might not be the same as the local commander's priorities, and you need to understand that in your messaging. So this is a little bit the aspect I wanted to talk about, the staff onboarding, making sure you consider all aspects in the recruitment process in terms of timing, and making sure that your auditors understand where they're going and what they're doing and what organization they're working for. The strategic objectives of an organization should be known by the auditors very well in order to better translate the message and better work, better deliver the work being performed. Civilian military cooperation. Huge, huge, huge benefit to have military as part of our team. First of all, the civilians might not have the military experience of deployment or missions, and the military bring this vision that we don't have. And it's a great way for us to extend beyond what we can do with the help of the military. So a civilian will come in with his IIA, Certified Internal Auditor approach methodology, which can lead you to X. However, when you have the military coming with experience in the field, it just adds another layer. I'll give you an example. My British military right now is a safety air engineer. And we had a new entity, like I saw in the slides earlier, the drones. So necessarily the drones are supported by the software. So we decided to go do a risk assessment on the software managing the drones. So this was some piece of work that I could do because I had experience with IT audit on one side, but he was bringing all the knowledge from the business. He had the airworthiness, the air experience, the air safety experience to bring the audit to another level. So this was a proof of joint approach to performing audit engagements of civilian and military. The so what for the private world is when you think you have an area that you might not be as strong, plan it way ahead. So training is available. You should try to get it at least a year in advance. So as soon as your audit program is sent out, 10 minutes later, you're already thinking, what am I going to do next year, following year? And do my staff need training? Do I need to get more information on this area? A knowledgeable auditor just brings so much more value to the delivery and to the command. Yes, you can run a methodology. Yes, you can run a risk assessment. Yes, you can run the process, document, but the knowledge of the process itself beforehand really adds value to the delivery. And that's what civilian military cooperation brings for us. So while it's great to have military, it's also a huge burden because staff military come for a period of 3 years. There's no military working for NATO. The military are on they're on secondment, sort of, for a period of 3 years to NATO. So they actually come work with us, but then leave again, and not necessarily with audit experience. So you need to create this constant onboarding of your auditors because you have always a new person coming in. So you need to very standardize the onboarding process. It might not appear as valuable, but we saw the morale and performance impact of making sure that somebody is onboarded well with proper leadership messaging, proper documentation, access to resources, makes the person so much quicker ready on the job. I cannot say that I've had very good onboarding from my past employers. And I think that's something that the military that they have to, because of these 3-year assignments. They have to be ready very quickly to apply to a new person coming in saying, here's your job, here's what you need to do, here's the person to contact, here's the key links. If you have problems, here's who you need to talk to, and here's what we're expecting of you. So objective setting, very important as part of staff rotation. So this is on the internal audit team side. But think about the impact on the auditee side. So 33% of my auditees are rotating on an annual basis. 3-year rotation means every person, a third of the staff, will be gone the year after. So when you write your reports, it always needs to be in your mind that you're starting an audit with one person, you're likely going to finish it with another, and it's possible that the actual actions resulting from the audit will be done by somebody else. So the documentation needs to keep that in mind all the time. And the follow-up process. So once you've sent your recommendation and agreed with the entity that this is what's going to happen, following up is very important because the new guy coming in might not know all of this information because you don't know the maturity of the handover takeover in this area. So you as the internal auditor need to always come back and say, hey, we have this on your to-do list. Don't forget it. Yeah, welcome to the Allied Command operations. Here's some of the points that's been agreed with your predecessor. Please let us know how things are going. So staff rotation, impact on the onboarding for the new people, but also how we report and how we monitor our findings after the fact. The customer funded model is a challenge. So when we have agencies performing a lot of the work for the IT, it's basically using a third-party provider. So you need to agree with them on service level agreements, on key performance indicators, and really establish a third-party management program internally strong enough to be able to be an intelligent customer. Having sister entities, we'll call it sister entity, really impacts the level at which you need to request, I would say, evidence of the controls or just transparency over the controls. Having a sister company really is different than using a fully external provider. You need to balance it. And this is the so what of this. You need to understand when you do your recommendation, the current agreements between entities within your organizations. It doesn't have the same maturity, it doesn't have the same structure, but you also need to make sure that this is the environment given to you. So the politicians decided that this is going to be a customer funded model. The politicians decided that the IT was going to be provided by an agency. So this is the world we live in. There's no point complaining about the world you live in. Yes, you can raise it out of risk, but where you add value is how do we make the best of this world? And that's where the audit can really provide value in third-party management, not to complain about the world, but rather find ways and solutions to make this better on both sides. So obviously, I don't have the right to go audit an agency. The agency doesn't have the right. So coordination with other internal audit bodies, again, is very valuable to make sure that the customer funded model, so basically the third-party management controls, are balanced, are not unusual or unreasonable on both sides. So this is part of being an intelligent customer. So you've noticed top right, I've always included a website. The website gives you where this information is public. Working at NATO is not easy. Security is a huge concern. You, for example, have several layers of classification. NATO classified, restricted, confidential, secret, cosmic top secret. I, for one, don't have access to cosmic top secret documents, for example. I have up to NATO secret. But the documents itself are stored on different networks. So we actually have two computers. We have one for the unclassified and one for NATO restricted and above, which makes communication and planning very difficult. We have two separate computers completely. And you can understand the impact on the evidence gathering. So when you build your audit file, you can't just take a NATO secret document and put it in your audit file. No. The security markings makes it a document that should remain where it is. You have observed it, and if it is necessary to refer to it in the audit, well, then you put a reference to this document. So collecting evidence is a big challenge in terms of data classification. One thing we need to worry less about data classification is the actual information security controls, which are very, very strong in NATO. It might not be as strong in terms of data protection. So when we did some piece of work a few years back in terms of data protection, we look at how GDPR was being translated, because while GDPR have some requirements, we want to make sure that NATO is mature towards these controls. So we did some pieces of work around this. So it was less about the information security, on which we have much more assurance, but really on the data protection aspects. So again, it's about building the file, making sure that you don't collect too much information and just what is necessary. And if you don't need to collect it, referencing, I think, is really the optimal approach here in terms of data classification. If I have a NATO secret document, which I print and I leave on my desk, I get a security violation. So security violations, you don't want to get too many of those, because then there's some potential impacts. Here's where some of you are going to be a little bit uncomfortable. ACO internal audit does no recommendations. So when we do audits, we do no recommendations. So at the end of the week, at the end of our field work, we've managed to collect the evidence of the facts. So we have a finding. This finding is that something is not sufficient. And then we have the detail saying the criteria. It should have been this, or this is expectations that we've seen. And then we have a whole risk section that says, if you don't fix this, here's what we think could potentially happen. And then usually auditors provide recommendations. So here's what you do. 1, you do this, 2. What we've had in the past was auditees agreeing with the finding, but disagreeing with the recommendation. And we were often found to have very poor performance of the audit results, because the recommendations were just being said, well, no, it doesn't apply to us, conversation closed. Well, it shouldn't, because the finding and the risks you approve, the how we're going to fix this is the conversation that needs to happen. And now what we've moved away from is no more recommendation. The field recommendation is now called management actions, and it's left blank. And when we send our draft report to the auditee, we say, here's the finding we have. If you don't fix it, here's what we think could happen. What are you going to do about it? So then the auditee takes upon themselves to find the right solution, which is absolutely wonderful, because you get, first of all, much more onboarding of the auditee in terms of solving the problem. I think it's Simon Sinek that said, always ask why, and making sure that people have a purpose. So when you ask the auditee, how would you feel? How would you fix this issue? They feel part of the solution, not part of the problem, and it has really improved the value of the audit reports, the resolution. So our audit recommendation, audit management actions are being solved at a much higher rate than it was before. We've really had success with this. The negative impact of it is when you leave the audit's not over. The draft report arrives and there's a whole coordination that needs to happen. Obviously, if we're not happy with what is being proposed by the management, we go back and there's a back and forth to make sure that we arrive at a acceptable solution. If the solution is not acceptable for internal audit, we then raise this as part of the audit committee, which we call our audit advisory panel, to say the risk is being accepted. Do you, audit advisory panel, agree with this risk accepted? And then there's a higher level escalation to solve them. But this is not needed to execute so far. When you give the auditee the autonomy to determine how to address a problem, they really take it to heart and they really apply something which is practical and reasonable. But it was very difficult in the past, not knowing fully a process, not knowing the staffing issues, for example, if they didn't have enough people, and that the auditee would simply say, I don't have enough people to do what you're suggesting, so I'm not going to do it. Well, then that's not the solution. So the question is, so what are you going to do about this instead of here's what you should do? The conversations are really leading to a better success on our side. So this is the no recommendations. I haven't heard any other entity, audit entity, doing this so far. I hope we're the first, but maybe the first of many. The bluff is very interesting. Though the bluff, I put the wiki link there. Bottom line up front. Our reports are going to senior commands, 4-star generals, very busy people, especially now, especially with what's happening in the world. They don't have time to read through 26 pages. They don't. So we structured our report on a 3-layered approach. The first one is a cover page. Cover page, within the first paragraph, there's the bottom line up front, the so what. Does the person, does the senior commander reading this, is this for information? Is this for action? Or is this for decision? So he already knows from the start if he's reading this for his own benefit, or does he need to do something about this? Really early in the presentation. Second, well, this was the cover page. Then we have a 2-page executive summary. So this allows him to very quickly take the cover page, keep it for him, take the executive summary, and send it down the chain of command to say, you are responsible in this area, please do something about this. So the communication and delegation process is even better because we're structuring our report in a way that it can be then split into layers and distributed into layers very quickly. So the bluff, the bottom line up front, is very, very useful. And I must say, in my past life, as most auditors, I think I was very boring. Auditors are boring. Nobody wants to hear or read what we have to say. We need to fight to get this. So we need to be better at telling a story, keep getting people interested. And we found that the bluff has been a huge success in getting people to listen, getting people to say, oh yeah, I read. Even if they just read the cover already provides succinct information about a topic, and then he can delegate to the appropriate entity the actual rest of the report. It doesn't need to go through the whole document. So cover letter with the bluff, 2-page executive summary, and then an annex with the actual report, which is just a collection of findings, risk, and management actions. So this is a little bit how we structured our reports now. The capping report is something new as well. So we just started doing this recently, and we've seen this bring very good value for us. The capping report is a collection of so what's from a topic. So when we build our audit program, we will choose a topic. One of the topic was third-party management for NCI agency, for example. But we did audits in multiple commands to see how are we dealing with this problem locally. So we covered 8 or 12 or 16. We have 16 entities. We covered, I think, half of them. And then these reports are given to the local commands for action. The problem with that is, considering the chain of command and the layering, you want something that has a more strategic view of the so what of these local reports. So when we have a JFC report, a single service command report, at the end of our audit program, before we move to another topic, we will create a theme-based capping report. So saying, well, we covered this topic, and here's the so what to you, commander. So centrally, there's some actions that we think for you, and additionally, please note, as part of management information, your local commands are having some issues with A, B, and C. So we actually state some central actions to be done, which we couldn't address in a local command because the local command area of responsibility does not reach to the higher levels. So we keep the local commands at the local commander level, but the capping report provides opportunity to approach problems strategically, centrally. Let's just say we need a new tool. Well, the tool, I don't want individual tool in each of the commands. I'm going to want one centrally that provides services to each of the commands. I can't mention that. I can mention it as a problem, but the solution won't come from the subordinate commands. The solution will come from the higher level command. And is a part of the capping reports that we address strategic level issues. So this is a little bit how we built it. So these were an overview of NATO. This was an overview of myself and some of the Allied Command Operations activities that I wish I knew in the past, that I would probably have applied in my work in the past, and it might be relevant to you. In terms of conclusions, this is ISACA Germany. I thought interesting to see all the NATO entities in Germany. If you look, NATO on the map, the top right one, NATO on the map, all of these entities, you can go see them and go see what they do. Just in terms of my scope, ACO entities, we have the E3 component where we have the AWACS. This is in Geilenkirchen. We have AIRCOM, which is the Allied Air Command in Ramstein. The NATO aspect is on an American military base there. We have JSEC, which we talked about, the logistics between left and right across Europe or through the Atlantic. This is in Ulm. And we have a KAOC, which is basically a control tower supporting air policy activities. This is in UDEM. And we have a signal battalion in Wessel, which is basically the Fireflies trucks, which are for the NCISG group, ready to create a mobile network, a communication network, wherever they go. There's some other entities. NATO School of Bramagau is not under ACO. I think it's under ACT. I've been there, very nice place. I was lucky enough to be able to go to Neuenstein, I believe, castle over there with the fog. Didn't see anything, but it was beautiful. There's also a NETMA entity in Munich for a very old capability, which was the Tornado and the EF-2000s. And you have 3 Center of Excellence. The Center of Excellence are not NATO entities per se, but they are NATO accredited to do some research and development in these areas. So in Kalgar, Ingolstadt, and Kiel, I hope I said that right. You have 3 entities which are responsible to do some research and making sure that the military are up to date on these topics, and that's what it's used for. Okay. Again, while we have some cyber defense structures here, since it's IT people, we have the NSERC, which is under NCIA, which is basically our SOC, our Security Operations Center. They also do a pen testing, vulnerability testing. So if you see any posts available for these, this is the type of activities they do. We have the SIOC, which is a chip, and SIOC is actually responsible for looking at vulnerabilities and issues outside and seeing how it applies to the missions. So it's a very interesting operation center. And we have the Center of Excellence, which is in Tallinn, which I believe published the cyber warfare document. So some interesting pieces of work coming out from there. NATO 2030 is agreed by the nations. There's a lot of initiatives that are coming out, that are coming. in this direction. Two of them mainly are Diana and the NATO Innovation Fund. So Diana will be headquarters across Europe and North America, which will do some research on emerging technologies. So they'll use startups and come work for them and do some research in terms of security impact of emerging technologies. And the NATO Innovation Fund is a little bit the same thing, but it's rather a pot of money available for grants for startups which are doing some research into emerging technologies. So these are two of the projects coming up as part of the NATO 2030, which have a cyber edge to them. If you're interested in working in NATO, it's actually not complicated. The posts are posted on the website. I put the website up there. We have different types of employees at NATO. We have civilians like me, temporary civilians, which work 6 to 12 months under NATO. We have consultants, which are cyber experts, not cyber experts, but just experts hired on short-term contracts. Contractors, which are like EY. If an EY person is being hired, we call it a contractor. So the contract is with EY, but we get an individuals. And we have internship volunteers and young professionals. So a lot of different little projects to try to bring in some young, fresh blood. Because, for example, when I started with ACO Internal Audit, the average age was 62 years old. So it's important to consider refreshing and bringing some fresh ideas. And the last bit, since we have possibly some suppliers, some IT suppliers, and if you want to do business with NATO, there is a lot of business to be done. But again, while it's one NATO, the procurement process is very individual. So I put the websites here, which includes the procurement and where you can find the RFIs and RFPs if you're interested in doing business with NATO on some of these projects. And these were the slides I wanted to present today. Back to you, Matthias.
Yeah, thanks very much, Maxime. That was super interesting. Thank you very, very much. I have to say, like 30 minutes, 35 minutes on an org chart. But I think it was fully deserved because it's so complex. And I mean, NATO has been in the news, so you hear about it, you believe, you understand it's just a group of different, all the countries working together. But of course, if you really think through, and it's exactly what you explained, all these different countries, to be able to work together, they have to agree on all different sorts and being organized and having 4,000 people, both military and then civil people. So it's quite interesting. I think you mentioned 300 committees. So it's a lot of activities going on there. So it's really well deserved. And I think now we far better understand what working for an organization like this may be comparable to the European Union, which is probably similar ways of approaching things, and committees and politicians working there, not necessarily commercial businessmen, but politicians that drive decisions. So really, really interesting. When you had on, I think you had at the end, you had like the audit reports that you issue. You said like no recommendation, and my first thought was, okay, it means like you're not issuing any reports. But I think the way you tried to explain is that you issue reports, but you let the auditees write their management actions.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, no, that's a good approach actually, to give them more opportunity for buy-in, and then probably makes close out easier, as you mentioned. There was one question coming through on your past experience, like if you have any kind of military experience from your past, from Canada before you came working for NATO.
No. The first time I had contact with military individuals was during the recruitment process. So I had a military individual sitting to me across from me on the recruitment board, and it was very intimidating. I've never been exposed to this world before, so it was completely different. And not knowing NATO at all before I applied to NATO, I was just seeing in the news. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. So it's I think it's important to get this information out and just to make people aware of the different structure. Because when you apply to NATO, you could be applying for several dozens types of organizations. So when you see NATO, you need to know, oh, it's this organization responsible for this, and it has a huge impact on your career plan after.
Yeah, absolutely, it has. It has. You also mentioned that the background checking process the background vetting process takes quite a long time. That's interesting, but I can expect there's a lot of steps to go through, and as you said, some specific training, walking through fire. That's really was really interesting, and I think it's just that very different way of how you operate or how you then have to perform your work as compared to us in a regular organization. I think lots of us here on the presentation today, we work in large corporates, but of course, typically you're multinational and you do have a number of sites. But if I just compare to the number of sites, probably that NATO with all the member countries, and you just listed about Germany, I think it's 12 facilities, and how they contribute. It's just massive if you think about this globally. And then the missions, it's very interesting.
Good. I'm glad you appreciate it.
Excellent. So with this, I would just thank everyone for attending our last session of the year. We already announced the January session is available on the website to register for. And to you, Maxime, specifically, thank you very, very much for taking the time, coming here, putting the slides together. And yeah, I wish you just a great Christmas break and a good year-end festivity season.
All right. Thanks very much, Matthias. This was great.
Thanks. Just waiting for Sarah to stop the recording.